All right. So, Thomas, for those who do not know you or do not know what you do, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Thomas. I do commentary for LabPadre. I'm also a moderator. Also a commentator for RGV. So
So,
I talk about Starship as well as SpaceX and what's going on at the Starbase site down in South Texas.
so how did you first come about working alongside LabPadre?
Oh, I it kind of starts first off with just finding the channel. Really, I was able to watch a lot of Starship activities down in South Texas. The issue was it was always kind of here and there. You really didn't get a good sense or feel of what was actually going on, just only the little things were happening day to day. And then I found Lab's channel, I believe, through either Marcus House or Felix Schlang, one of their great videos. They were kind of talking about live streaming on YouTube for Starship, and it was LabPadre. So I joined the YouTube chat, joined the Discord, and then several months later, I was asked to be a mod. And then right after that, they said, "Do you want to go on commentary?" And I'm like, "Sure, I guess." So I jumped on the commentary and been there ever since.
Yeah, because you seem to be one of the very knowledgeable people on the LabPadre Discord. Obviously, you have your annual rocket talks that you do. So you gather all your 100 odd tabs you have on your browser and you go through all the new updates and all the new sightings we've had from Sanchez build site to what's going on at the launch site. So tell us, is Starship the first biggest thing you got into, or was there something before that got you interested from that to Starship?
So I was really interested in what SpaceX was doing ever since they really said that they were going to be propulsively landing a booster. And they did it. They did it many times. And I was paying very close attention to everything from ITS. Even I remember there's rumors of a Falcon X back in the day. But things were very different very quickly from like year to year. As things progressed, it kind of got smaller, and then it went to stainless steel, and the things changed. But it was very consistent that they were actually wanting to go to Mars. That was their end goal and objective here. And so far, it's been just an amazing journey to see what they have accomplished so far and how close they are to achieving that objective.
Yeah, because Falcon 9 is the most reliable rocket we have now. From 2011, when the shuttle program ended, we then got introduced to the commercial crew program. And obviously, that's when SpaceX took off the most with their Falcon 9. They started with Block 1, and then they developed Block 4 when they started attaching landing legs to see if they could start to recover the boosters. And then magically, they managed to recover their first booster. And then after that, it just seemed to be a recurring process where they could say, right, we've done this here, this is how we replicate it, and this is how we're going to do it every single time. And now they have boosters that have flown 10, 11 times. And it's never been done before. SpaceX is the first official private company that's ever done this.
Yeah, the only other companies that have actually done propulsive landings that were very small suborbital hops. Very interesting, but nothing to the point where we're looking at here with SpaceX. So this is not just Blue Origin. There's other companies as well, even during the 90s, that were going through and launching and landing these things. But it was only like 150 meters in the air kind of stuff. It wasn't very anything exciting until you found out about it. Years later, like, wait, we already had this technology. But the problem is you're looking at a fully, reusable booster stage, which is incredibly to find. It's not something you would see anywhere else except with SpaceX.
And then obviously now they've gone from the Falcon 9 from doing propulsive landings, where they've gone to Starship with this new maneuver they've called belly flop, which now uses, so it will go horizontal and it will use its flaps for aerodynamic control. And then obviously it flips back around and comes back for a propulsive landing. Now that was done within 3 attempts of a Starship launching to an altitude of 12.5 kilometers. So we had SN8, which came very close to landing, SN9, which went to the end, SN10, which landed for 8 minutes and exploded. And then we had obviously the first ever successful one, SN15. We do not talk about SN11 because that just poof disappeared.
All we know is we saw flames. It must have taken off, and we're still looking for it.
Exactly. Actually, we're still looking for it to come back to this.
Got pieces of it right here. I just found this on the road. Basically, back in the beginning of April, it was just sitting there. I'm like,
Starship
well, that's fun for an object debris. So I had to pick that up and throw it in the back of my car, so nobody's car tire would run over the thing.
Very lucky to find that. You were down there at the right time, Thomas.
Oh, I was very lucky. So I was down there for SN15. We were scheduled months in advance. We were just there to hang out and watch, Starship activities progress.
Yeah.
Maybe get a static fire or a cryo test or something if we were lucky. Actually, by that point, we thought SN15 would have flown and would have just been after the fact. But it was so close that people started rescheduling at last minute on me, and I'm like, oh no. And so they arrived early, and some people actually had to go home just the day before Starship SN15 flew.
You were very lucky to get it timed just right with you then, weren't you?
Yeah, nailed it.
You must have been very excited.
Oh, I was like, this thing's going to probably take off the entire time we're here. I had about 2 weeks that we set for just going down there, taking pictures. It was supposed to be this very lazy experience that it's not, struggling to do scheduled activities at a moment's notice, because that's what we ended up doing. Getting up early in the morning, getting down to the launch site. The day before we had any launch activities, we knew that we weren't going to have a launch or anything. So we jumped down there. We basically we're down there for sunrise, and everybody else was like suggesting we do that and saying we should do that. But Chuck and I, the gentleman I brought with me from Idaho, I flew over to Idaho, grabbed him and flew down to Texas with him. We watched the sunrise. We watched SN15 venting, as well as a test of a nose cone, which nobody else had seen or heard until us, and that was it. We got to see the results as well from other pictures, and I got to see that just coming down the road just days after the test.
Tell us what the atmosphere at Raptorus was like.
Oh, it was pretty quiet. So we try to be quiet, but you could feel the energy in the air, like it's about to happen. And you have people talking behind you saying, I've got my contact at SpaceX. He says, we're go for launch. And this is about the same time that YouTube pops up. And I'm like, maybe not. But the YouTube stream pops up, and we actually have a real countdown. And it's like, that's going to be about 30 seconds behind what we have in reality. So don't use that. Just know that we'll be pretty close. And we just sitting there counting down, hoping it's not going to be a scrub or something. And it lights up, and it just sits there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's going to abort. But then it just keeps going and going, and it's just kind of still sitting there in my perspective. And I realize, oh, it's actually moving up. And I just haven't noticed because it's so big and so far away. It doesn't look like it's doing anything at that moment. And then it just takes off out of these clouds and then rises up through into the clouds.
It's very slow moving when you see it on the ground, but then obviously SpaceX cameras have been all over the launch site, and it's just like you get an angle from the camera of the 3 engines in the center. That's how you know when it's moving up, because you can see clearly from the engine bells to where the test stand is. Whereas, say, if you use the Raptorus cam, it looks very far away, so it doesn't look as if it's moved. So that bit is understandable. But there's a lot of crow and a lot of speculation when it comes to Starship, because we don't have an official timeline from SpaceX for Starship activities. It's a case of right, you see this, right, this is what we think is going to happen. This is with the timeline that we think it's going to happen in. And then things change, obviously.
Yeah, it was one of those events that we're anticipating, we're expecting something to happen, and we're basing this off of a lot of speculation and Crow, as well as the road closures, that the fact that they're doing them. They put out a notice. They were looking to do another attempt before we were there for that. We were like, yeah, it doesn't look like it's going to be happening. There's nothing happening at the fuel farm. It was just really dead for a long time. And then they had just a little bit of activity that day, like say maybe something could have happened, but that was, I think, 2 days prior. So we launched on May 5th. So I think it was like 2 days prior to that. That was the first day we saw a potential event, which was going to be a flight of SN15, but nothing happened. It was just one of those things where we rushed out there in the early morning to make sure we could get there in time, but it was not quite the same.
Yeah, so many people were hyped that it could have launched on May 4th for Star Wars Day. That would have been incredible to see. However, as you say, it was a case of, oh right, they cleared the pad and then nothing happened.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was. I couldn't remember which day it was, but was it May 4th that particular day happened? It just
I think it
felt
was,
like it was
yeah.
longer.
I think it was May 4th that day happened. But yeah, it would have been cool to see it launch on Star Wars Day, but maybe we'll see that for the suborbital flight on May 4th this year if we're lucky.
Yeah, well, I would say that the biggest change of understanding being down there is a massive perspective change on the scale of things as well as of time. So with LabPadre's multi-view streams, as many cameras as he's got up to 8 now. You can go through and go from point to point to point and just view everything in between and get a really good understanding of what's going on the site.
Yeah.
But when you are there, you cannot do that. You can only look at one thing at a time, and everything is a lot smaller than it feels. So I was kind of expecting a little bit of that, but with all the images you see that are zoomed in, you always think Starship is so huge, and it is, but your perspective from the roadside, it kind of adjusts and changes and says, okay, it's big, and I'm not too far away. I'm about 2 football fields away, but it's not actually that big. It's not the full stack. I didn't ever get to see that yet, but I hopefully will be able to see that later this year. The other thing was I wasn't expecting the cryo shells for the orbital fuel farm to be so big. Their presence is just massive. You stand next to these things and you feel like you're underneath giants because they're so wide and so tall. They're a little bit shorter than a Starship, but they're right up against the road pretty much.
Yeah. How many are there now? 6, I think.
There's a total of 8 cryo shells.
8. Right, okay.
Yeah, one of them's a water tank. We've got methane tanks that are not being used, but then the rest are nitrogen and LOX. So it's basically just for the orbital fuel farm for the super heavy launch with the full stack, and then they actually just got in 5 more horizontal tanks with 2 other large tanks sitting next to them.
Yeah. So talk to us about how Lab got started with his Starship progress down at Boca Chica, now having his cameras installed. Tell us how he got there.
So first off, Lab was basically just like to record different music venues. So he'd have friends or people who he knew that they're like, hey, yeah, come over. We'd love you to record this. And it was back in the early 90s. That's where he got started in his hometown. Then he started doing a little bit of wedding videos and things like that. Wasn't really his gig. Then we moved down to South Padre. He did start going through and doing live streams for just different events or spring break. Just, hey, there's a camera up here at the top of let's say Sapphire or Pearl. Those are the hotels down there. And he just started recording that and just live streaming it and, get a couple hundred views and, just a nice little YouTube channel it started off with. And then he would post some other cool videos of off-roading or other things with his vehicle, the Beast. Yeah, now it's Rover. I think it's Rover 2 now. But yeah, he just got started doing that, and then one day, SpaceX came into town, and it was kind of interesting. Like, they were about to do something called a static fire, so he turned the camera around to show what was going on there, and lo and behold, from Sapphire's view, we got to see a static fire of Hoppy, the Starship Hopper, the first prototype. It's very much an amazing amalgamation of a water tank, Falcon 9 parts, and just a whole lot of enthusiasm to make something happen.
Yeah, because
I'm pretty
sure Boca Chica was originally meant to be used for Falcon operations, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was supposed to be for Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, basically just a modified Falcon 9 stage or core stage, but it was all supposed to be RP1 and oxygen, and they were going to have potentially maybe half dozen different launch and landing sites down there. It was going to be their primary launch operations, or at least envisioned that way. But things kind of changed. They decided they were not going to go that direction. They were going to do basically ITS, the Interplanetary Transport System, or then they decided kind of the BFR. It kind of changed and made multiple progressions of what it is today. Now that's stainless steel instead of carbon fiber. It's instead of being 11 meters wide or 12 meters wide, it's now just 9. So it did shrink down, and for good reasons. It was too big. Even now, it's still actually a bit too big, but it's just perfect for a massive launch market that will be able to appear because of it. The prices will go down, and they don't have to build a launch site at Florida to do this, but they are now. But they would like to be able to have progressions of rocket launches without being encumbered by, let's say, their competitors or a military launch. If they cannot launch in Florida at this point, when, let's say, there's a satellite or a bird that's about to fly that is a military cargo or something, or other competitors are saying, well, we're on the docket first, and so you can't do anything with your Starship program, no testing, none of that. So they did it all here, and they will continue to do all of their testing development and build up down in Boca Chica, which is technically Copernic Shores. If you ever looked at a map, it's actually Copernic Shores, the subdivision that it is, and Boca Chica would actually be where Labs Tower is. It's really weird and interesting, but the best part is that this whole site is still very active and very much alive, and will continue to be so, even with a FAA review about to be finalized here, I suspect at the end of March or maybe beginning of April. It's just down to 2 different government agencies, specifically the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the Parks Department. So there's Civil War stuff, and then there's environmental concerns that they want to address all those things, and it kind of rehashes everything that they've already talked about. So
yeah, because we've had FCC clearance, because all they do is they offer a license and grant licenses for communication for these kind of developments, but that doesn't give them permission to actually launch. That's where the FAA comes in.
Yeah.
Now,
so they need a launch license for the site, for the vehicle, and for each individual launch.
Yeah, because this is where we've seen regulatory approval for SN8, SN9, SN10, etc. Now, do we think it's going to be a while after the FAA approves their final PEA, or do we think it's going to be within a short span of weeks that they'll grant approval?
It basically, after they get the orbital launch license, they need to finalize all the other insurance things. So they either have to have money in the bank, or they have to go through and get an insurer to say, we will do a launch. We need this much insurance for each one of these launches, and they will pay a premium for that. So there will be some logistics after they get the launch license, and they will kind of know some of this stuff is coming. Excuse me. So they wanted to make sure that they have all of those ducks in a row. They'll make sure they either have enough money in the bank account and or enough basically insurance to cover if an accident ever did occur, which it's like the odds of an accident where either a person is hurt or killed, it should be basically 1 in a trillion or more. The odds are basically you'd have to be there intentionally to get hurt or killed, and that's always the situation where you always have to clear the site, make sure everything is basically no public at all. They have all sorts of cameras and instruments to help look for those kinds of things. And this is a public beach most of the year, so
Yes.
they have to make sure to clear it out, and they look for any signs that anybody could still be there.
This is where LabPadre's cameras come in useful, because I know now Elon, after SpaceX tried to remove the cameras from their site, Elon gave special permission for Lab to actually install his cameras there permanently. And now we know that Elon also uses Lab's cameras for his own benefit, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And obviously Lab and his wife have met Elon in person. I mean, how did that come along?
So that was the main Starship event that happened back in about 2019. So I think it was 2019. It's been a while, but that was with Mark 1. So it was a stainless steel prototype. Everybody at the time thought, and even I think Elon for a time thought it was going to fly, but they didn't really, after a while, expect it to fly. But they still had this amazing prototype built. They stuck the nose cone on and invited all the press and media out. And Lab is one of the individuals who was watching Starship from, at that point, it would be Maria Pointer's backyard. So she's a friend of ours. She lived right next door. She's like their first neighbor right there. She helped, give us a seat to watch things from. So instead of her window, just a little bit higher up, and we got to see all of the construction and action happening and all the activities. But this Starship event was the first presentation that Elon gave, and there was press as well as the just the villagers. So there's a large still presence of villagers, about say 9 to 11 people or households still there that are not SpaceX, but the rest basically did sell off. But the thing was they did invite them to this event, and the press did get a few people coming in, specifically Lab and a few others that were able to meet Elon. They just said, "Hey, would you like to meet Elon?" It's like, what? Really? Yeah, got a little bit more of a special event over here for you in the back. So it was just one of those very like, wow, that happened events for Lab and everybody else who was involved there. And it was kind of just really mostly the local people who were media personalities like Lab, as well as Austin Bernard. I can't remember all the rest, but I do remember seeing a few other pictures. But it was a very short private select event. But they were sitting there kind of waiting for him, because he was actually talking to the villagers. He was basically understanding their complaints and trying to get everything documented. And he had his lawyer, writing things down, or his assistant, I'm not sure which was, but they were writing everything down that they needed to go through and either communicate back with the villagers on, or make adjustments to some plans to say, okay, this is what we should really be doing. Because there's a lot of information that was kind of back and forth at the time, like who do we need to buy properties from, or who needs to sell, or how is this going to affect our lives? They weren't really sure. There was just a lot of questions at that time.
Yeah, Lab must have been really, really hyped when he got the chance to meet Elon. I mean, the chance to meet him is like 1 in 1,000, I'd say.
Oh yeah.
It must have been really surreal for Lab, and obviously meeting him would have been an absolute privilege and honor to him. And now he's got Elon's approval from himself to use his cameras around the Starbase launch site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's actually something where the day that actually it was the next day, Lab was going to take out his camera equipment on that particular incident, because he was leasing that property, and the lease was up basically at the end of that day at basically like midnight. So he's going to be taking it out later that day, and the next day it would have been gone. They jumped the gun. Some employees or somebody at lower management at SpaceX decided to jump in there and take down the camera and other things. That was just like, at first we thought it was stolen. We weren't sure what was going on, but a good friend who lives nearby had driven down and said, "Hey, what are you doing? That's lab stuff." And they gave him the camera equipment, which was kind of like, okay, who are you? How did you get this stuff? Yeah, the incident was very brief and minor, but it was kind of upsetting for a lot of people that this had happened. And so then we did get permission to continue using the property until they made it into a parking lot. And Elon said, yeah, he'll work with us on any other sites once things are closed on that parking lot, and they are now. So now we use the rover vehicles, and that actually helps out SpaceX too. So rover vehicles are not on SpaceX's property directly. They are basically just adjacent to it on the public beach or on the public road. And so it doesn't actually affect SpaceX in that sense. And Lab has talked and communicated with the security guards and the sheriffs and made sure everything's okay there. One day he did get one of those orange things at the very beginning to say, you might need to move your vehicle. And he called up the sheriff's department and talked about, oh yeah, this is just a camera rig here and what's going on there. And they were good with it, and they haven't done anything since or communicated anything except for the presentation event that was the latest Starship presentation. And they did ask him to move it for aesthetic reasons, because they would have this big, nice front entrance, and he moved it over down the road, and then he moved it back the next day. So it worked out really well.
It's all about the cooperation between SpaceX, the security, and the sheriff to ensure that, right, they will happily give Lab permission to use his cameras, but it's in certain events that they'll be like, okay, this is what we would like to do, so this is what we would require of you. And obviously Lab is polite enough to do that because he knows that's what needs to be done. And so I think this is really good between the sheriff and all the people involved, and why he's got his cameras there. And I think if it wasn't for Lab, we wouldn't know a lot about what's going on today.
Yeah, we would only get these little snips and tidbits, and there's now a lot of more photographers down there, but we still miss a lot of things. We've got 24/7 live feeds. There's things that are happening down there that it's like, wait, what happened? We had what stacked? That we've got fog, so we can't see it, but there are definitely still a lot of these little events that are fantastic things. So Ship 24 just recently got stacked. So that was just like a big surprise to a lot of people, because all of a sudden there's images of Ship 24 already stacked in high bay, and nobody knew about it because it was so foggy, and it kind of did it in the middle of the night too. So I think the operations are moving for not clandestine reasons, but for the sake that it's nice and cold at night. They don't have to do as much thermal control. It works out really well to just do it at night.
It does, yeah. So to wrap things up here very, very shortly, we now obviously know that Starship will be moved over to Brownsville Airport for a stand outside the airport. I think that's on Starship Road, if I remember correctly.
I think that's right. I think they renamed it long before that point, actually.
Yeah, so they're going to move one over there, but it's a question of which one are they going to move, because obviously they've got a few sitting in the rocket garden over in Sanchez. They've got one currently stacking in the high bay. They have choices.
Yeah, I would go with 20. It's got the nice tiles. It looks good. 16 is not quite finished yet. Doesn't have the shoulder blades on the lower flaps, but 20 would look great.
I guess it depends on if 20 will end up flying or not, because at the moment there's still crow going on.
Yeah, there's crow, but the fact that it's in the rocket garden kind of means that it's been put out to pasture. I don't expect to see any further use of Ship 20. I'm sorry, 21 at this point.
I was going to say, because 20 is not in the rocket garden, that's still over at the launch
22,
site.
yeah. Time's up, 22. Sorry, I'm thinking of 22.
Don't scare me like that, Thomas.
20 would be good as well, but that one's still an interesting one. We're looking at more advanced rockets being built like 24, and booster 7. So we're kind of expecting, based off the limited number of launches they have per year, that might be the next step is actually 7 and 24, and booster 4 and ship 20. They are probably just going to be test articles for now. They're using them as test implements to test stage 0, it appears.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot to look forward to coming up here in the next couple months. It's just a case of we eagerly await the FAA to finalize their PEA and say, right, they're all clear for an orbital test launch. And then from there, we keep our eyes out.
Yeah, all clear, go for liftoff.
It's certainly an exciting time.
Yes, it is, and I'm hoping to be down there for the booster and Starship launch when it happens. It's going to be happening so fast. What we need that the PEA finally done.
I certainly hope you make it down there.
I do too. Thank you.
I appreciate you coming on here to talk to me, Thomas, and thank you for being a representative of LabPadre, and I look forward to chatting with you more soon.
All right, you too. Talk to you again soon, Marcus.
Thank you very much, Thomas.